what I am, it turns out, doing is 3 quite short videos, very much sticking to my sort of 15-minute plan. And the subject has clearly morphed or into or has become or is what you will, I think, agree can be called philosophy for Christians. And very, very brief. 3 15-minute little talks on here, as I say, extremely brief. The first one was looking at how elements of philosophy are strongly critical of this modern idea that streamlines everything into this pro-science, pro-proof element of philosophy. And in that one I missed out both the pre-Platonics or pre-Socratics and Hegel. So in the second one I looked at the pre-Socratics and Hegel. And in this third one, I just thought things we sort of touched on it. In that second one about the pre-Socratics, I only sort of set out this dichotomy between the students of Heraclitus and the monists around Parmenides, and how that sort of created the scenarios that Plato managed to unify in a kind of synthesis under the idea of what is good, and that humans must strive for good, and that's a foundation for philosophy. And so I was sort of thinking, well, there's so much of interest around the other philosophers that really give the weight to those two. So I thought, well, I should really try to rattle through the others very briefly, because it's just quite fascinating. But always I get to this issue with these guys. I'm looking at notes for this. I've done notes for you. So my style may change slightly. There's this sort of, oh, they're very old. Anyway, let me look at what I wrote. I think it's a shame that it's all considered to be old and far too old, even that we say, oh, we must consider the knowledge of the ancients that have been passed to us, because that sounds very much a one-sided view of looking backwards rather than forwards. Instead, what I really want to be considered, what I really consider to be more accurate is that these ideas have become very slowly the foundation of our civilization, and the idea of the Greek sense of truth through Plato and ideas of the trained academic thinker are the basis of how we consider ourselves to have a root in something like knowledge. And there's so much else going on as well to discover. So I really feel that it's interesting, and only recently have these things been considered irrelevant suddenly. And everybody thinks that proof is the means of truth, and that knowledge is now singular. And everybody knows what the core of philosophy is, and it's singular, and it's proven. It's science is the nature of truth. So what I'm saying there as a sort of preamble is that the reason why I'm nervous of including this is because it will be sniffed at and dismissed. This is very old. We're all terribly modern. We don't engage ourselves with these things. Well, actually, it's just very interesting. I think to you guys it will be interesting. You sort of those looking for something other than this science-based philosophy in the history of philosophy, but actually you explore it and it's really not that. It's incredibly there's things when you actually explore what the purpose of these rather strange ideas is. It's actually quite interesting, if not powerful. So there's a very early philosopher after those, what's called the Milesian school from Miles on the Asia Minor, on what is today Turkey. The Milesian school is sort of dismissed as being strange people who come up with these ideas of what the fundamental element is, and that we know what's the proof of that. In that quite early group is a guy called Xenophanes, but as I say here, I reference Thales as well, and Anaxagoras. So Xenophanes, I wrote here, I'm going to struggle to cover Xenophanes in a couple of sentences. It just seems quite remarkable. In fact, one has to go back to what Thales was doing in order to. What is remarkable? In fact, what do I mean by that? It's quite remarkable, in fact, the relevance, as you will see. One has to go back to Thales, what Thales was doing, which was the sense in which he was rejecting the text, the use of speech to text is causing problems. Oh, he was rejecting Homer and Hesiod, Thales. So in that sense, okay, Homer and Hesiod attributed remarkable things to gods. Thales looked instead at the physical world, and thus can be seen as being taking a step towards a clarity and a naturalistic approach. So rather than resting on myths, the old men who prefer the basis of society to be based in the myths. So this is a challenge to that. This move away from Homer and Hesiod is very much a sign of this first school of philosophers. And Xenophanes was very much a part of that, although he also had influence from Pythagoras. He continues this sense of looking towards the naturalistic by suggesting that miraculous things like clouds and rainbows come about as a result of water from the sea, which in our modern understanding proves to be correct. Already we're seeing that even these first philosophers who are dismissed as nonsense by the Anglophile modern philosophers prove to have some interesting things to say. So by that I mean Thales. Did I say that? So Thales is looking for a substance that is the basic substance of everything. But as you can see, that's quite a naturalistic way of looking. It's contradictory to the sort of mythical way of looking at things of Homer and Hesiod. And now it's enough, and he also becomes remarkably. He also becomes remarkably significant to our debate, in that he is possibly having stolen the idea of apeiron from Anaximander, but also possibly having had influence from the early Zoroastrians. He talks about the all, by which he is referring to something that is more clear in its thinking than the Greek gods at the time. This is Xenophanes of Colophon. Is it Colophon? I think it's Colophon. Xenophanes of Colophon or something like that. Anyway, he's about 585, around there. He he considered it to be poor thinking to suggest that gods look like humans, and suggested, as is often quoted, that if horses had gods, they would look like horses. He referenced Pythagoras, criticizing his ideas of the transmigration of souls, showing again that his clear thinking or rational tendencies. On which note, we've already mentioned Pythagoras. Pythagoras, yeah, I've argued elsewhere mentioned elsewhere that the idea of the soul was something that Socrates was very into, and talked about personality as being something that no person in the street would deny exists, but that the sort of the tendency for humans to need to be good means that there is a divine or positive side to personality. We're saying personality is a thing that exists. And take the divine part of that, the positive side of that, and that gives you a soul in a sense. But Pythagoras also talked about souls. And, what does Pythagoras mean by the transmigration of souls? It's absolutely pure Buddhism. The cycle of birth and death, the pollution of the body purifies the soul until you escape the cycle of birth and death. It's absolute, totally Buddhism. It's just insane, really. And what you can see, if you look at the much more sort of pure version that you see in Descartes later, when he says that there is a mind and there is a body, he's getting down to real basics. Come on, what? Let's get rid of the stuff that people are going to go, oh, that's a bit fluffy. But you can see that in Pythagoras' idea of the purifying of the body is a sort of an. Later we get Empedocles talks about love and strife, and you can see in that the sense of the strife is the chaos of the Greek mythology, and love is this sort of goodness of Plato. Plato needs goodness as a way of combating chaos that takes over anyway if you don't get involved and look after things. And as I mentioned earlier, Voltaire said, tend your garden. Similar thing, you've got to get involved, you've got to have a goodness in humanity to combat chaos, to combat strife. So yes, the body is a pollution, but the process of that purifies the soul. You can see again this sense of these ideas that gave birth to this very pure version that Plato gave us, which is, this question: is there good? Yes, we can say there is good. There must be good in the human. These ideas were being generated not only through Anaxagoras. I'm getting confused with Anaxagoras. Oh, I've got my names wrong. Anaximander. Anaximander is the guy who, after Thales, talked about Apeiron. Anaxagoras is much later, just before the Sophists. And so Anaxagoras later goes into this idea of love and strife. But even then, right after the Milesian school, Xenophanes is talking about his attack on Pythagoras. And Pythagoras is talking about the body as this sort of impure state, and the soul as being the more positive, being purified by interaction with this the pollution of the body. So these ideas that result in what is, I think, the basis of idealist philosophy, which is Plato, and a much more solid rooted base, which is this question: can we say that there is a need for humans to strive towards the good? And Plato says yes, there is. You can see the source of that brewing in these people. Okay, so next we get on to, so we've had, I think this is the thing I was very interested to tell you about, which I will just briefly go through, and then we can end on about 17 minutes. I talked about the monism of Parmenides in contrast to the students of Heraclitus, who said you can't stand in the same river twice, or even you can't stand in the same river once. That water is flowing, it's always changing. So out of this sense that actually, no, there are solid things at the core. Out of this comes Democritus, who talked about atoms. There are particles, objects that are core and never change, and they get built together. There are different sorts, and they get put together in different combinations. That's Democritus. Yeah, we clearly know this is interesting. And then there's Anaxagoras. Oh wait, sorry, Empedocles is love and strife, not Anaxagoras. Says that seeds, this is why I had to write notes. I'm sorry, I can't remember these things, but I have done the reading, as you can tell, because I've done the notes. Anaxagoras had a slightly different thing, but both of these come out of this monism, this unchangingness of Empedocles. Anaxagoras considered there to be seeds, and again they come together in different combinations. And this seems almost more like cells, and he says that I think he says they repeat, which seems like much more like cells in the sense that they have DNA that is copied and it sort of multiplies itself. I seem to remember that's what I seem to remember from reading Anaxagoras, but I might be wrong on that one. Anyway, so both those guys really are a product of this monism, and you can see how that adds weight to the Eleatic school of Parmenides, this idea of things don't change, if that makes sense. So that's a sort of monism against the everything is constantly changing. You can't even stand in the same river once, let alone twice, of the students of Heraclitus. Okay, there we go. 17:47, 18 minutes. We're going to stop there.